All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to the after show of our episode number 0 of Seeing God in Biology with my dear friend, Dr. Fuz Rana. Fuz, how are you doing today?
Good, Ahmed. Good. We had a great opening episode, I thought, and thanks to your excellent production work, I was very pleased with it, and hopefully people get a little bit of a taste of what the show will be like. But uh, in many respects, I think what's to come is even more exciting than episode 0.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone, so this was actually the one where Faz has given us an explanation of what DNA is, how it's structured, because we are going to go through plenty of material about the marvels of God's creation in on the molecular level, and DNA is essentially where all the magic is seems to be stored, right, Faz? As far as as far as we know, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and the way it's gonna go for everybody to know is that we while you're watching the episode, you can actually put your questions in the live chat there, and then I'll move them here, or you can put them while we're doing this after show, or you can actually email them to me prior to the episode according to the title of the episode. So by the way, next episode is going to be about this amazing property of DNA, that DNA can actually act like electrical wires, and it's really amazing. And one of the things that we are going to do in this series is that Fuzz, as a biochemist, will explain the topic from the biology and biochemistry aspect, and I will have some comments also about how this relates, for example, to electrical engineering, to communications engineering, to computer engineering, to information systems, to information theory, because really so much there is related to those topics. And then I am sure that those episodes, we try to keep them all below 1 hour, like in 40 minutes, 45 minutes, 50-minute kind of range. There is a huge amount of information, but then we have the after shows to also answer all your questions. So this will be an interactive exercise. We already have planned for at least 15 of those for the coming 15 weeks. We have the episode planned, and it's really interesting stuff. So let's start by doing what we should be doing now. What do you think, Fuzz?
Sure.
We already have a couple of questions here. So we have a question from Ronjo Khan. I hope I am pronouncing this correctly. He says, why God needs to make DNA? He can make anything without any complexity. He's all powerful. And then he goes, God doesn't need to make any complexity. He's all powerful. Theology is not based on what atoms are doing, I guess, after correcting. So what's your insight about this question?
Yeah, I'm not sure of was it is it Ranju's uh,
Yeah, Ronjo, yeah.
yeah, Ranjo's uh, philosophical or religious perspective. So I'm just going to answer from my perspective as a Christian, and I would love to hear your thoughts, Ahmed, too, from an Islamic perspective. But you know, I actually encounter a lot of Christians, at least here in the United States, who express similar sentiments, uh, and and I understand that because we are people of faith and we trust God, and our focus of our faith is to be on God and what God would have us to do, and so I fully understand the sentiment, but from a Christian theological perspective, as we look at the Old and the New Testaments, we see statements that very clearly indicate that God has made himself known to us through what he has made. And so, if science is the study of the world around us and the world around us is the handiwork of the creator, then we would expect science to unleash insights into the marvel of God's work as creator. And so you could see actually atoms and theology connecting in very powerful ways because what we see again in the created order reflects God's glory and majesty, we talk about seeing God in biology and the marvels of creation in this program, and so this prompts us with an attitude of worship, and again giving honor to God, and on top of that, if this is the approach that we think about studying nature, then instead of viewing the insights we learn about, biology in this case, as being at odds or somehow undermining our faith, we should see it as really strengthening our faith. And what an incredible thing to be able to think God's thoughts after him and to see what God has done, and again to marvel at it.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, from the Islamic perspective, I think that there is an observation, and then you can look to try to find what is behind the observation. And the observation is, Islam came to people who were for so many centuries not really well known for science. So Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula were not really known for science. You had the Romans, you had the Persians, you had the Greeks, you had the Egyptians, you had the Chinese. The big civilizations of the Arabs were all destroyed by the time of Prophet Muhammad. So you had the Yemeni part wiped out by a flood. You had the Petra guys, like close to Jordan, also desolate almost. And it's like it's the Romans and the Persians and the Egyptians. Egypt was actually almost occupied by the Romans for so long. So, and then the observation is Islam came, and suddenly Arabs are spreading everywhere. And it was not like the Mongol Empire, So the Mongols went everywhere, destroyed everything, and here we're ruling, sitting on a heap of dust. But Arabs, as Muslims, went to places that were centers of civilization and made them great centers of civilization. So you had places like Iberia, for example, Spain, which was not known on the global scale to have been a center of civilization. And it became a center of civilization in Europe. And you had Egypt revived again, and you had Baghdad became an unbelievable place of science, and you had Levant, etc. And my explanation to that is that there are very clear instructions in the Quran asking Muslims to do research. And it is almost, in my opinion, and I think in the opinions of many, like a religious obligation. And there's this verse that says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it is evident to them that it is the truth. So, and when God is talking about the truth, he's obviously referring to the word that his people are reading, the Quran itself. But essentially, the Quran takes us to God. So essentially, he says, if you look into science, then he's pointing to two places, horizons. So I interpret it not just as the visual horizon, but also as the visual horizon. So he's pointing obviously here to cosmology. So you're looking as far as you can. The horizon is the end of where you can see. So if you can see farther, by telescopes, by deep space telescopes, then you have to look. And then you notice that the Islamic civilization happened that quantum jump in astronomy. And then there was another quantum jump in medicine, because the other part of the verse says, we'll surely show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves. So really seeing God in biology, within themselves, part of it, how living things are created. And what it says is, when you go to those two frontiers, the very big or the very far away, and the very small and living, you will find my mark. So I think from the Islamic perspective, the answer to Ranju is, it is not a matter of God being able to only create with complicated structures or not, but I think there is threefold to the answer. Number one, it sure says that this cannot be a product of chaos. So maybe this is part of the wisdom behind it. Maybe if life was so easy to occur spontaneously, maybe Darwinists would have had a point, right? If life was like as easy as crystallizing a piece of water into snowflake, or crystallizing some carbon into diamond, and then guess what? Diamond is living or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting to that point. Sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
when Darwin wrote Origin of Species, he was very careful not to address the origin of life question, but in a private communication with, I think, his friend Joseph Hooker, he speculated on this idea of the warm little pond, where these materials from the environment could begin to organize and coalesce into the very first cells. And this idea was the foundation of the O'Parent-Haldane hypothesis, about 40 or 50 years later. But at that time, Darwin's thinking was reasonable, because the view of the cell was the protoplasmic view, where it was a cell wall, maybe a nucleus, and then the cytoplasm was considered to be this amorphous jelly-like material that people thought was a single compound that could easily form through chemical reactions, right? And it was only as we began to understand the complexity of the cytoplasm that really this naive idea, began to be questioned. And so at the turn of the last century, going in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, most people thought the origin of life problem was intractable. And you had people like, Arrhenius, who was a Nobel laureate, who said, well, maybe the seeds of life are everywhere, that life is just given in the universe, right? That we just take life as given, just like we take matter and energy as given, right? That was the sentiment, because it's too complex to really explain. So to your point, right, is that if life was simple, yes, God is powerful enough to do it, but it really, I think, lends itself to a materialistic explanation. It's only it's not just complexity, but it's the organized nature of that complexity and the elegance and the ingenuity, the wisdom that undergirds it, that really points to a creator. Sorry to interrupt you.
Of course, the obvious intentionality and in everything is in its place. It cannot be like even things that are beautiful in nature and get organized due to losing energy, like a snowflake. It gets so beautiful, but we know that a snowflake, you can almost write one fractal kind of formula, mathematical formula, that when you run in the computer will generate a snowflake. But nobody can write a mathematical formula, and create a cell. It's unbelievably, as you say, complex. So I think this is the number one reason that it needs to be complex, so that there is a very great and obvious distinction between life and non-life. And it actually, I know you're the Christian here, not me, but it actually reminds me of a verse in the Bible. I think it's in Genesis. So this is, Muslims consider the Torah and the Gospel and Psalms as holy books. So I hope it is really in the Torah, but I think it says something in line with God commanded land and the earth to produce, animals and plants or so. So to me, and there are very similar quotations like that in the Quran. And those quotations just keep appearing when life is addressed.
Yes.
And I think the insight here is land and the sea on their own cannot, without this God's command, do the trick.
Yeah.
And this is why, now let's imagine this, guys. Let's imagine that after discovering the electron microscope, we look into the cell and we find that it's this smudge of, gooey stuff we call cytoplasm. There's nothing else there, right? And let's imagine that this guy, Miller, the Yuri Miller experiment, and it was as easy as, a strike of thunder, and you have nucleotides or amino acids, and guess what? You have life. Then I think this would have been a great shock to the thesis of creation. But it turns out just like what the Quran says, and just like what Genesis says, it needs God's command.
Yeah.
And so this is number one. And number two, if it needs God's command, then it has to reflect his characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
He's all wise, he's all knowledgeable, he's all powerful. So we expect this thing that needs the extra ingredient of God's command to reflect those features, I guess.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that one?
No, I think that's exactly right, because again, in the old, particularly in the Old Testament, but
we
it's
have
hinted
we
at.
have a hello brother here from Bread of Life. I think this is Rebecca. So hello,
Okay.
Rebecca. We also had a salamu alaikum from Doctor's Faith Corner. So alaikum salam. All right. Sorry for cutting you off.
No. We want to
Yeah,
give a priority to the people that are
Yeah.
joining the program. So, but yeah. So it particularly in the Old Testament, it's not just simply that we see evidence for God's fingerprints, but the Scripture teaches us that we can discern God's character and nature imperfectly, but we get hints at it. We see His love, His faithfulness, His goodness, but we also see His power and majesty, His eternal nature. And so there are clear pointers to not only that there is a mind behind everything, but it gives us, it begins to point us to, who that creator is, right?
Absolutely.
And so similar ideas. And just to back up, I keep preventing you from making your really good points here, but it's interesting because when you look at the creation account in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there's a number of different verbs that are used to describe God's creative activity. For example, bara, which means to originate something that has never existed before. So this is used in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth, and the word there is bara. This was
do you know what's the Arabic word for that?
What?
Bara'a.
Okay, so I'm not pronouncing it.
It is the same word almost in Hebrew. So, and even it's one of God's names in Arabic in the Quran, Al-Bari.
Yeah.
Al-Bari al-Musawwir. Al-Bari is the one who does bara'a. So the one who does bara, as you say.
Yeah.
It's really when you compare these things, it will bring me to my third point. But just go ahead. It's really amazing.
I'll go fast. But another place, interestingly enough, where that word is used is with regard to the creation of sea mammals. That's where and the creation of human beings. And so you see that God is bringing into existence something that has never existed before. And the particular emphasis would be the universe and human beings. But then there's other words like asa, yatsar. These are roughly the same meanings, which means to create something new from that which already exists. And then there's words that imply God is overseeing or superintending a process like haya, right? And it's interesting with the creation of Eve from Adam's side, the word is bana, which means to rebuild. So Eve is Adam rebuilt, right? But in other words, the point here is that there are a variety of different ways that God is creating. It's not just simply a single mechanism. But what's exciting is, and this is to your point, is every time it speaks about life, the words are implying God is directly and personally involved. It's not just God ordaining a process, but God is actively involved in that. There's an intimacy, which to me is incredibly beautiful. So sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. And actually, while you were mentioning it, you find the same thing also in the Quran. We also have here Assalamu alaikum, by the way, from Ilyas Al-Modi, alaikum assalam. And actually, Bread of Life was saying alaikum assalam also. So even bana, we have like bana, and it also means build. He uses this in something like creating the heavens, but he uses for creating Eve khalaqa, which is not like bara'a. Bara'a is always from no previous example. Khalaqa can be, there might be a previous example. It's like create. And then it says that he could have created human beings from something else. Okay, so Eve is created from Adam, but he chose to create Adam from a non-Adam. Not, he didn't say he created Adam from a chimp ancestor. All right, so he said, I will intervene at that point. I will create Adam with my own hands. In the verses that relate to a dialogue that happened in heaven when God commands everybody to prostrate to Adam in the Quran, and then the only one who refused was Satan, and then God asks him, قال يا إبليس ما منعك أن تسجد لما خلقت بيدي. What has prevented you from prostrating to he whom I have created with my hands? So very clear indication. So it strikes me really when I listen to theistic evolutionists, if the term can be correctly used, and they say there is no contradiction between religion and Adam being having an ape ancestor. How on earth can you reconcile that? But it brings me to the third point from what you were saying, which is if DNA and almost all elements of life are so complex, and complexity of this sort with the kind of naturalistic processes described have to be contingent. Okay, there are so many dependencies. So it actually tells me something extra, which is that there is only one God, because maybe we could have looked into one or another organism and found that it's something completely different than DNA. It's completely different. But we look into animals, they don't look like plants at all. Okay, we don't look like bananas. We don't look like pineapples. But in the core, it's the same DNA. We look to insects, it's the same DNA. We look to microorganisms that are eukaryotes, it's DNA. We look at the ones that are bacteria, it's also DNA. It's just DNA, like circular DNA, linear DNA, but it is DNA. And it says, so I think the other thing, number one, is too complex. So even if somebody who's completely crazy would say that it happened through contingent processes, then please tell me if those contingent processes can eventually land that kind of complexity. Why? Where is the rest of the gradient of complexity up to this crazy complexity? Where is the things in the middle, and where are the life forms that are really based on less and more complex things, to the extent that we should find life forms that have in the core something that's completely different from DNA, which we don't have. Yeah. So I think the three things are, number one, it says that this cannot be a work of nature, it's for sure. Number two, it says that it reflects the qualities of the one who has created them, who has to be separate from nature. And number three, it says that it has to be only one. Yeah. Because if it was more than one, where are the KHA, not DNA, kind of organisms? It's not there.
Yeah.
And then on top of all three, you look at the scripture, you look at the Torah, you look at the Gospels, you look at Psalms, you look at even the Hindu scripture, which I think has a prophetic nature at its roots, and other religions. And you see these statements, and those statements, give the consistency of all three aspects, to the extent that that the one who has written those scriptures must be the creator. There is no other. Why would somebody like Moses or Muhammad, peace be upon them, say something like God commanded the land and the sea, or say something like look into yourselves and the rises? Why do he say something like this? He can just talk to people about things that they know. So I just want to take your opinion also about the third one. About
I think your third point is very good, and I couldn't agree more with you on your 3 points. But let me add to the third point, if I may, because a lot of times as I engage people that are skeptics, they will ask questions like, well, if God is all powerful and all knowing, and he's an infinite creator with infinite resources, why on earth would he create life on earth so that it's all built around the same kind of designs? Doesn't it make more sense that this is reflecting common ancestry? And I think your point is really powerful, that indeed it does point to, the reality of a single creator, the fact that there's a universal nature to biochemistry, or that there are these homologous structures that we see throughout biology. But another way to think about this is that maybe this is telling us something about the creator, that if let's imagine a creator did what we're speculating. He made every life form has a unique molecule that harbors its genetic material. Biology would be almost impossible. We could study one organism and learn all we could, but that doesn't help us formulate a general understanding of life. But the fact that everything is built around universal biochemistry, universal cell structures, there's a universality again to even the anatomical and physiological features. It means that we can study DNA replication in E. coli, in the bacterium E. coli, and suddenly that insight applies to human biology, right? Or we can study the biology of yeast, and from that extrapolate information about human biology. We can perform experiments, on mice or rats, and from that, gain understanding that really allows us to advance medicine. And so there's something very loving, that the creator wanted to provide for us, that if science is a gift from God, then he's provided a way for us to make sense of the world around us, right? It's intelligible because of the way he's created the world. But it also allows us, again, to go back to the original point, is to see the creator's handiwork very clearly. Absolutely. Right? Very, very clearly. And so in some respects, yes, he indeed created the living systems with an incredible complexity, but there's also an underlying simplicity in the universality of life itself, or aspects of life.
Absolutely. And actually, even I totally agree with what you said, but I can actually extrapolate more.
It's a contest who can extrapolate more.
Yeah. So I'll tell you something from engineering first, and then I go back to biology. Okay. So let's say that scientists in Japan versus scientists in the United States have completely different mentalities. Totally and completely different mentalities. So they simultaneously arrive to the idea of a computer, and both have computing technology that is nothing like each other at all. Okay. What does this mean? Number one, it means that you cannot take a product from Japan and use it in a computer in the United States, and vice versa. And it also means that recycling will be like hell. And it also means that communication between these systems will almost be impossible. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because it occurs that, for example, when humans die, bacteria causes them to decompose. It occurs that when we're hungry, we eat a banana, or we can eat a chicken, or we can eat, I don't know, a rabbit, or we can eat a shrimp, which looks like an insect, kind of. Okay, and some would eat, lacostes, and some would eat. So every creature eats some other creature at the end of the day. Okay, there are no creatures eating rocks around the place, and this universality not only shows that there is one creator, but that this one creator is also creating a harmonious ecosystem that self-sustains, that recycles, that renews itself, that has all the interrelations between itself, that has the ability to, as you say, when we study E. coli, we find a cure for something in humans. but also that we can have model creatures. You call them model organisms, I think. So you can make an experiment on a mouse and speculate that this medicine will work on a human. You can find therapy in a kind of plant somewhere deep in Africa. So the point is that for a system, in the Quran, Allah says that He has created everything on earth for the human. So if the human is the pinnacle of His creation, and in the hadith is like, خلق الله آدم على صورته, Allah has created Adam on at His image. So if the human is the pinnacle of creation, and all of those are for to set the stage for this test, then we expect to have symbiotic relations, to have, we can eat those things, they can decompose our bodies, we can love them and relate to them, and we can have a cat and have a relation with the cat and a relation with the dog, and and I think this unity is also again a reflection that there is one creator and that all of those are really worshiping Him. We just have the choice to choose to worship or not. But yeah, so I hope that was not a very far-fetched extrapolation.
No, it wasn't. That was really good. No, and something that I really enjoy is to hear your insight as an engineer, because it's remarkable how concepts in engineering manifest in biological systems, particularly biochemical systems, but then how concepts in engineering can help us understand the rationale behind what's going on in living systems. So I loved your point very much.
Actually, it brings us to a question here we have from I think Mrs. Reem Oda, and she says, my anatomy professor says he would recreate the human body to make it better. Since there are flaws in our anatomy, what do you think, doctor? So she's addressing you, but I'll just tell her something.
Yes.
I have a series called Reem. I have a series called Marvels of Creation. Okay, and there are two sub-series. One of them was with an orthopedic, somebody who studies the human skeleton. Another one was with an ophthalmologist, somebody who studies the human eye. And I want you to watch them, because I have to tell you this. Every single nonsense that Darwinists say about inefficient design is false. It's either due to ignorance or due to deceit. This is just after I have personally had this and these are very long format episodes. One of them is like about 3 hours. Okay, which is talking about like the human hand, like designs related to the foot. This is unbelievable engineering designs. The only reason somebody will say he will create something better than it is that because he does not understand it. I'm not sure. What would you say to something like this?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think your recommendations are really good recommendations. I've not seen the series, but it's been my experience. There's all kinds of examples that skeptics and evolutionary biologists specifically will throw out about flawed biological systems, whether it's the molecular level, at the organismal level, or even beyond that. And invariably, these statements are really based on the authority of the person making them, not based on actual evidence. And many times these statements are made about systems that are incredibly complex that we don't fully understand. And that when we develop that understanding, what we realize is that these systems have to be this way, that there's a rationale for why they are this way. And if they were any other way, the systems would actually be, would be flawed systems. They're not flawed systems the way they are. But it takes, again, deeper study. Sometimes we actually see what I'll call suboptimal designs in biology, but almost always that suboptimality is involved with a trade-off, right? Where given the laws of nature that are fixed, if you're trying to design complex multi-objective systems, where some of those objectives are in conflict with each other, you can never have every aspect of that system optimized. You have to sub-optimize components, but the sub-optimization is done in a very careful, balanced way to produce an overall optimal system. And so it's either what we thought was a flaw is actually an elegant design, or it may actually be suboptimal, but in the larger context, there's an overall optimality. So, and I've written a few articles. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a biochemist. I've written a few articles about goosebumps and wisdom teeth and and those kind of things. Excuse me. But I would refer you to the real experts who you've interviewed, Ahmed, because in my experience, when you talk to the real experts in human anatomy, they just laugh at this idea that these are flawed systems. They just laugh at them.
Absolutely. Actually, guys, I would like to tell you this. During the coming episodes with Fuz, we're discussing elements of complexity in the genetic system, okay? That would be for somebody at a certain level of ignorance, he would say, wow, why on earth? I'll just give you a very small example. So behind me, I have an image for a DNA double-stranded helix, right? And maybe somebody who knows nothing about what he's talking about, Fuz, would say, why does he have to have a pair of each nucleotide? Isn't this like a waste, for example? But then let me tell you guys this. As an engineer, okay, when we store information, the basic level of redundancy, which is called RAID, okay? So the basic level of RAID is to have two copies of the same piece of information. So when, for example, if you have a hard drive and you get a bad sector on the hard drive, how would you run something that will fix the bad sector? Because if it's bad, how does it know what's the original? It's because there are redundancies built in information systems. So this is just a very simple example about what we are discussing, and I guess, Fuz, it's very known thing that Darwinists used to say, wow, this DNA is full of junk, right? They used to say that. And wow, this is very inefficient design. There is only like 1.5 to 2% of the human DNA that is useful for anything. Well, guess what, guys? You only know 1.5% of the knowledge that's in the DNA. It is that you are 98.5% ignorant that you are saying this, because one decade after one decade, they get struck with, that this DNA that they call junk is actually transcribed. They still do not understand what the transcription products do, but it shocks them. And then the ENCODE project says, no, this looks like 80% useful, etc.
Yeah.
So to Reem and to everybody else, when you get this, because Reem down there says again something, says, she says, I agree, but that's what my professor said, because Bread of Life, Rebecca told her here that we don't have a clue how to make a human, much less to offer something better than God's design. So she says, I agree, but that's what my professor said. This is a high-level professor, by the way. So I'm telling you, did you hear about something, Fuz, called the Salem Hypothesis?
I don't think I have.
Yeah, okay. So this is a ridiculous hypothesis, and it goes like this. If you find a creationist, or if you find somebody who is advocating creationism, the odds are he will be an engineer or a medical doctor. This is what it says. And then somebody took it one step further, and it says, if you find an engineer who is advocating creation, the odds are he will be an electrical engineer or a computer engineer. Can you believe it? So I respond to it like this. Guys, if you think that the people who have built human civilization over history, which are the engineers, and those who have treated humans over history, which are the doctors, really don't know what they're talking about, then there goes human civilization. If the most, directly, professions of direct benefit, of course, engineers need scientists behind them because they do apply technology. But if the ones who have built every house that we have lived in and treated every person who has gone sick really are biased and don't know what they're talking about, then nobody knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I guess. So
yeah, no, well, and that's my experience, is that the people that tend to respond positively to the design evidence are usually engineers or medical doctors. And to me, I think it's because, if you've never tried to build something, you don't really appreciate the ingenuity in designs when you see it, or you don't appreciate the difficulty. And so engineers, as you're pointing out, because they build things, they immediately recognize when something is incredibly elegant, and they recognize immediately how hard it would be. Likewise, medical doctors are looking at dysfunction. They're looking at what goes wrong, and through that process, you begin to appreciate just how carefully and precisely everything is constructed. One of my daughters is a nurse, and I can remember one time having a conversation with her where she was just, as she was learning human biology, just at how well everything goes together. And so, she just, went out of her way to make that comment to me, that she just simply couldn't believe how well things go together. And so, yes, there are a lot of people in the academy who are highly prominent, highly accomplished, scientists who deserve our respect for what they've accomplished, but they operate from a particular worldview, which oftentimes is materialistic. And if you hold to a materialistic view, then you have to view life again in evolutionary terms. And the expectation is that evolution is going to produce flawed, imperfect systems that are just good enough for survival. And so to me, just understand that that's the perspective they come from, and people will use their influence to advocate for their perspective and their worldview. But it doesn't mean that again, there's not a legitimate counter perspective, whether it gets hearing in the academy fairly or not. There is a legitimate counter, perspective. So, the best thing you can do, I think, is ask questions. I would not challenge a professor if you were a student. It's not really very respectful, in my opinion. But I would ask questions, and ask sincere and probative questions, and that's a great way, I think, many times to expose, the thinking. Not to belabor this point, but one of the areas that I think is fascinating in terms of providing us with evidence for a creator is the emerging area of synthetic biology, which is the fusion of engineering with biology to create new life forms, to design living systems. And what becomes evident when you look at the work in synthetic biology is how much ingenuity is required to engineer a biological system, let alone to try to produce a protocell. The level of knowledge and ingenuity is through the roof. If it's not for that ingenuity, you're not going to take molecules and make them into protocells.
Absolutely. And I would also recommend that everybody would have a look at my discussion with Dr. James Tour, who is actually a synthetic biochemist, and he builds molecules for a living, as he describes himself. And he just told me this, Fuz. He told me the more we learn about the complexity of life, the more it becomes obvious that we will never understand how life started, because the more we know that we don't know. Yeah. You know that so much out there that it gets even more important. The more you get near, that it gets farther from you. So this was the thumbnail of this discussion. Happened this last August, and it was a wonderful one, really, for those who would like to have a look at it. And then we also have here. Actually, Bread of Life says, "Amen. I'm thankful for Muslims and Christians uniting together to share the truth about God's creation." Thank you for this, and I have to thank you again, Fuz, because sometimes I do have discussions with Christians, etc., about theological issues. But at the end of the day, number one, Muslims do believe in the scriptures of the Torah, the Gospel, and the Gospels, and Psalms, and of all those prophets. But more importantly, our worldview at the end of the day is completely different from all the materialists. At the end of the day, there is one category being theists, and then we are the subcategory of being in the monotheistic tradition and of the Abrahamic religions. And I think if Muslims and Christians do not really sink it in this age, that we have much more common denominators than differentiators, then I think this will be a critically bad decision. What do you think about that, Faz?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic very much to that point. One of the things that really personally grieves me is here in the United States that there, particularly among evangelicals, there's, I think, sadly, animosity towards Muslims that are here in the United States, and to me, I never understood that because Muslims are for evangelical Christians natural cultural allies. As you said, we have the same worldview.
Absolutely.
We recognize that there's a creator, and that we share also the same types of moral convictions, right? We both value human life, and so we should be at minimum cultural allies, and at minimum we should be people of goodwill towards one another. And yeah, there are some theological differences, and maybe some of those differences are very deep and profound, but we should be discussing those differences in the spirit of friendship, not not in a spirit of animosity. And so there are good things that can happen when we work together.
Absolutely.
And we get to learn from one another. There are things that I've learned today from you that are really interesting and fascinating to me. And so, yeah. So
well, Faz, I learn something new every day from you. Thank you for that, really. So here we have Doctor's Faith Corner. He says, if DNA is storehouse of information, then which force see the information in DNA and implement the commands? Is it Ra? I don't think it's Ra. I think here, if DNA is intelligible information, doesn't that lend itself to that it's coming from a mind? Is there any other explanation? Is the question. What do you think about that?
Yeah, to me, and this may be an imperfect analogy, and I'm used to throwing out analogies, and then you come back to the table with even a better analogy. But but one way to think about this would be, let's say, like an automobile engine. That the automobile engine is conforming to the laws of physics and chemistry, but you can't explain its origin through the laws of chemistry and physics. It's through the work of an intelligent agent, and there are implied instructions that you've built into the structure of an automobile, or into the automobile engine, so that it's going to behave or operate in certain ways. It's somewhat like algorithmic information, where you've somewhat instantiated information and instructions in the very structure and the operation of the system. So it's conforming to the will and the purpose of the one who's made it. Yet it's hard to say, well, this is exactly where the commands are being executed. Now, of course, when we talk about DNA, the analogy would be obviously hardware and software systems, which I will let you take over.
Absolutely.
But in other words, there doesn't necessarily need to be a command specifically within the molecule. I think the command is removed one step away, right?
Yeah. Actually, the analogy here is okay. So let's say that DNA is obviously an information store. So what we have there is sort of a software or a recipe for production of something that then produces something that then produces something that then produces something. So the next something is RNA, the next something is a protein, and then the protein is a machine that typically does some other function and produces something or creates something. So at the end of the day, let's say I give you a set of binary codes, okay? And I tell you, guess what? This binary code is this unbelievable program that it will solve the unimaginable mathematical riddle. Okay, and then you look at it, and then you tell me, well, what can I do with it? It needs a computer to execute, right? And then tell you, okay, go and put it into your computer, and then your computer, okay, has the electronics that are not compatible with that kind of instruction set. Okay, so at the end of the day, it's not only a matter of writing software that proves that an intelligence has written it, because at the end of the day, the zeros and the ones can be as good as noise if there is nothing to read them. So I think there is a point in the question, which is that we only recognize that DNA has information because there are machinery that actually does read and interpret this information to produce something that obviously fits for a purpose. And I know the word fits for a purpose is very close to your heart, because actually Fuz is writing this amazing book. It's called Fit for a Purpose, right? And this fit for a purpose is not only, wow, you have it beside you. So this is one book I would recommend everybody to read. Maybe we'll do a book review together about it soon enough. But not only that this one product of that DNA program fits for a purpose, but that all those other programs, when they are loaded into memory, they work together and they produce, there is no ping system error coming, on your forehead or something. You're working all the time. So yes, if DNA is information, the evidence that it is information is not just in the fact that there are nucleotides that are arranged together, but that there are machinery that is there to read this, interpret it, produce out of it machinery that does things that fits with other machinery, not only in the living organism itself, but even with the bigger environment. This is the striking thing to me, that you will have, I don't know, one bacterium that transcribes something that produces a chemical signal, a protein, that is read by another kind of bacterium that interprets it, for example, as an alarm that there is a problem in the environment and we have to run, or we have to produce an antitoxin or something. This thing says, this is information, this is software. The one who has written it knows what he's doing because he has also created the compiler and the interpreter for it. I hope I have made the point clearer here. What do you think? What do you think of this?
I think
isn't the very existence of a transcription and translation system evidence that this is just not just random stuff?
I think that's really very powerful. That I have a friend named Jim Harding who used to be vice president at Amazon.
Wow.
And so he's an computer scientist, information scientist. And, he talks about this idea that ultimately you can't have symbols, which it would be another way of saying information, right? But you can't have symbols unless you ultimately have, you have minds that are recognizing something as a symbol and agreeing upon what that symbol means. But that he argues that the only true symbol that isn't really derived from really that kind of agreement is ultimately found in the nucleobases of DNA, and that material, those material symbols have to originate from something that's immaterial.
Absolutely.
That our minds are immaterial, and they are originating, symbols and ascribing meaning to symbols in agreement with other minds, but that ultimately it all traces back to the nucleobases that are in DNA, and that there's got to be something outside of the system that is giving that ultimately that information. It's the immaterial is interfacing with the material or manifesting in the material.
Absolutely. Or let's even say it like this: Chinese will make no sense whatsoever unless there are Chinese people to read it.
Yes.
So it proves the existence of both, proves the whole point. So yeah, we have here Munir says, love the laugh. I think he was referring to your laugh. I think the audience here really love you. So, and says, Elias says, Dr. Fuz is the best dressed guest you've ever had on, by the way. And he's one of the most composed also, and very pleasant person. Reem says, I'll definitely check out the videos. Thank you both for the answers. Thank you. And I actually show you here. So this is my latest episode with Dr. Ahmed Gum'a. And this was about seeing, actually, it was about seeing in 3D. This is what it was about. And this was really amazing. And we discussed all those elements that contribute together to the seeing in 3D. And he even referred in one of those discussions to those people who are really saying absurd things, like, you know, how the arrangement of cones and rods on the retina could have been better, and this nonsense. And he showed that this arrangement was the ideal arrangement, even the matter that they are looking the other way, that we would expect them to be looking. And he relates that to refresh rate of the pigments in the cones, and to blood supply, and to oxygen supply. Unbelievable engineering. So maybe send an anonymous link to your professor, and he will change his mind or something. And then we have, so Reem says, thank you, Reem. And then we have, we have also Munir Ahmad says, what scientific experiments have been done to assume a common ancestor? Well, that's interesting. What would you say about that? Is there a scientific experiment that you have seen as a biochemist who studies these molecules? I had actually a discussion with an atheist today in one of those groups when I posted our promo. And he said, what are you talking about? DNA, because he saw the title is DNA structure. He says, DNA is evidence for evolution, for common ancestry. What would be your comment to that? Is DNA evidence for common ancestry?
Yeah, you know, a lot of times, you know, people will point to really the shared biological features. So what he means when he says DNA is evidence for evolution, he's really meaning that there's shared, you know, DNA sequences that are found in the genomes of organisms that you know, naturally group or cluster together. And so the idea here is that, well, these shared features naturally lead you to conclude that evolution must have happened. And what's interesting to me is that prior to Darwin's publication of Origin of Species, most biologists were well aware of what are called homologous systems. Now, they're obviously working at an anatomical and physiological level, not at a biochemical or genetic level. But they didn't naturally think that this meant that life evolved, but rather they argued that this is clearly a creator using an archetype.
Absolutely.
You know, and in fact, Richard Owen, who's one of my scientific heroes, saw this as the ultimate expression of design, because he said it's amazing that this creator, you know, put in place this archetype that is so robust that it can actually be varied in different ways to create organisms with a wide range of functionality, yet they still conform to the same archetype. And so he saw the archetype as really the organizing design principle, where functionality took second place to it. But again, marveled at the fact that this archetype was so versatile. What's interesting is that Owen was well aware of what are called vestigial structures. He didn't say, oh, vestigial structures, that must mean evolution. He's like, well, of course a whale has a pelvis, because if the whale didn't, it would violate the archetype. And so he saw that there's a beauty that undergirds, and an order that undergirds the biological realm. And so the point is that there's not really an experiment done or an observation that actually demands common ancestry. It's an inference from the data. Because what Darwin did was, Darwin was well aware of Owen's ideas. He appropriated the archetype and he evolutionized it, making it a hypothetical common ancestor, right? And so it's an inference that you're drawing from the data. What we see in front of us are shared biological features. And we talked earlier in the after show about the brilliance of that design. actually,
Absolutely.
and the theological implications of that. But the point is that prior to Darwin, people, the inference that was drawn was that reflects the work of the one cause, who created a world, with archetypes. And remember, I talked just about my friend Jim Harding and his idea that there's got to be the immaterial that undergirds the material, because of the fact that there is a symbol. The symbols in DNA are, in a sense, not agreed upon convention, but are instantiated within the creation. But you had people like Plato talk about the forms, the idealized forms in the immaterial realm that then are manifested in the material realm. And so that to me is the way I think to think about these shared features. But again, there's not an experiment that proves this. It's just simply an inference. And what's interesting to me is that if you ever open up a silverware drawer, right? And you've got forks and spoons and and knives. Well, you would look at, they share common features, and there's also distinct elements to their design that reflects their functionality. But nobody looks at a silverware drawer and says, these clearly share an evolutionary ancestry, right? We don't see the shared features as in evolutionary terms. We see them in design terms. Or the history of the automobile. We talk about the evolution of the automobile, and yes, indeed, it does go through a progression from simple to complex. There are, new technologies that are introduced, and then all the automobiles from that point will have that technology. And so you have, if you mapped it out, it would be a nested hierarchy of technologies. So we understand that this is a history undergirded by design. Though we may talk about the evolution of the automobile, it's very clear that these are systems that are designed. So we interpret shared features that we see around us always in archetypical terms. We see the history of technology in design terms. So then why, when we go to biology and we see shared features, do we then say, well, this must be common ancestry? Or we see a fossil record that goes from simple to complex, that we see this as reflecting an unguided evolutionary history, as opposed to a designed history where the creator is orchestrating that history. So anyway, my thoughts.
and your ideas about the automobiles, and it is essentially, to me, when you see automobiles look like each other, no matter where they were built, that the builder is humans, and that humans are like each other. The designer is the same. Actually, Reem has another comment here. She says it's quite hypocritical for scientists and professors to claim we know very little of the total knowledge available, but to then make judgments based on that minuscule knowledge. Absolutely. I think
I couldn't say it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's so easy as a scientist, and I'm speaking now as a scientist, it's so easy to develop hubris and arrogance, and some of the best scientists I've ever known, who are world-class scientists, are actually men and women of deep humility. Is that they are world's experts. They have an incredible bank of knowledge, but they actually take to heart your very point, and they are really people of remarkable humility. But then there's other people who are scientists who take that knowledge and that expertise that they developed over a lifetime, and indeed there are people that you want to listen to in terms of their technical knowledge, and yet from that they develop this arrogance almost, and a lack of humility, and they're prone to making these very quick snap judgments about things that really more reflect their worldview than actually what the knowledge is demanding.
Absolutely. So here we have also Bread of Life. She's saying, I look forward to having you on my channel, Ahmed. And she also added, she says, Dr. Rana, I would love to have you share this on my channel too. Thank you both. So thank you, Rebecca. And actually, Rebecca invited me to go to her channel. I think this will be like somewhere. It's either next week or the one after, but we'll be watch out for her notifications.
Yeah.
And
Rebecca, I'd love to join you on your channel. All you have to do is ask, and I'll do my best.
Sure. So I'll connect you both actually. So Man's Man says first we must argue for God, then the specifics comes later. So actually, why the reason we're doing this, Fuz and myself, is that we said, okay, we'll not just keep on, in the defensive with those Darwinists. We are going to call this seeing God in biology, and I have to say that arguing for God from science is one of the in Islamic tradition. I also believe in the Judeo-Christian tradition is a very viable path to show that number one, God exists, number two, that He is one, and number three, that He is all wise, all powerful, all knowledgeable. And all of those qualities can actually be seen as a reflection of science and the marvel of His creation, I guess. We have here Artugrul. Okay, so that's his Turkish name, I guess. So he says, Man's Man, yeah, there are 31% Christian in life population, 29% Muslims, and etc. Hindu, Taoist, Shan, how extreme secularists mock on every religion's God only to play God. Yeah, some people in their denial would consider the whole population dumb if if it serves their worldview, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Elias says, can you speak briefly about the new study that shows that mutations may not be random at all? Actually, number one, I have to tell you guys, I wanted myself to do a review of it, and actually Fuz agreed that we might as well do something about it. But Fuz, what's your comment on that? It's this thing, latest paper that talks about discovery of mutations specifically in plants, and that they are actually not random. Can you give us a comment about that?
Yeah, well, and I'm still working my way through the study, so I'm not going to say much other than to say that I've actually seen up prior to this study other studies that that were suggesting that or intimating that mutations may actually not be random, and we know, for example, there are hot spots in genomes where mutations are going to happen more likely than other places. And when mutations happen, certain types of mutations are more frequent than others. So the transitions are more likely than transversions. A transition would be like a T to a C or a C to a T, whereas or a G to an A or A to a G. So it's purine or pyrimidine transitions, whereas transversions would be a pyrimidine to a purine and a purine to a pyrimidine, and so we I mean, in a sense, this isn't surprising to me that because I've seen things that are suggesting this. But what that means then is, in terms of making the case for common ancestry, you can't argue that shared features, even if you think they're non-functional, are actually the result of shared ancestry. It could be that you're looking at non-random mutations that are introducing the same features into the same locations in genomes. But it also means that now these non-random mutations become part of the design argument, because it means that you very well could have in the laws of physics mutations that are dictated, that arise out of the laws of physics, that are actually being used in the biological designs to help the organisms respond to the ever-changing environment. So there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. I'm curious. Again, I've not read the article in enough detail to really comment on the specifics of the work. It's on that long list of to-do things that I've got in front of me.
Yeah.
But Ahmed, I'm curious as to your thoughts.
Yeah,
particularly as a information scientist.
Yeah, so I actually went through a review about what the paper is talking about. But what draws my attention is actually a couple of things. Number one, I made a prediction a few months ago. luckily, actually, more than one instance. One of them is just like a couple of months ago. I went into that show and I was so furious about that matter of random mutation. I said, I bet you that one day it will be clearly discovered that mutations are not random. So this is really came in the right time. But the second thing is the absurd commentary of the evolutionists who wrote the paper. Number one, I have to thank them for writing the paper. But then, they are so apologetic about the evolutionary God that they say, well, it seems that evolution is not random, but it seems that non-random evolution has itself evolved from random evolution. So this unbelievable and shocking prejudice and bias and is really absurd, because as an information scientist, as an engineer, you don't get random processes that are really random and then you expect them to produce processes that are not only organized themselves, but that are against randomness, that have bias. Because what the study says is that mutations have bias. So they don't like to mutate certain genes, and they are okay to mutate certain genes. And this is completely against the Darwinian thesis. And then for them to put this comment or this apologetic kind of thing was really hilarious. Yeah. Do you hear them doing this all the time, Fuz? It's only
Yep.
me. Yeah, unbelievable. So here we have also another comment from Ilyas Almodi, and he says, there is a UK evolutionist called Robin Crompton who is putting forward the hypothesis that evolution is reversed, that we devolved from more human-like ancestors. Ever heard of this? Well, personally, I didn't hear of it.
Yeah, I've not heard of that either, but you've got me interested, so I'm going to write down Robin. Was it Crompton?
Robin Crompton, yeah.
Yeah,
Robin
let me
Crompton.
write down his name and then or her name, and then I will be happy to take a look at it, because my curiosity has been piqued, but I don't know the idea.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you something. I just have those couple of insights. Number one, I agree and I disagree with him. I agree because we did come from a more advanced human. His name was Adam, by the way. So, so my personal belief is that genetics of Adam and Eve must have had something special. This is my personal belief. This movie, The Fifth Element, kind of thing, where they show that the fifth element has 5 strands of DNA or something funny like this. But I think that the genetic diversity that is the current status of the human beings, I don't agree, for example, with Dr. Joshua Swamidass that it can be a result of cross-mating between Adam and Eve, the biblical or the Quranic Adam and Eve, and other non-human evolved chimps. I would rather think that the genetic constructs of Adam and Eve had a kind of richness that was then unfolded into further generations of humans, and that would on its own explain how come we have so much genetic diversity. And I think the very aspect of Eve being created from Adam is telling us something in that respect. But this is a big topic. I don't think we can cover it here. And the second thing, as an information scientist, the reason I disagree with him is that if you assume a reversed gradient of information, then you will eventually arrive at a complete nonsense. Because if every creature is essentially a devolution of a previous creature, then it means that the first creature was the ultimate complex one. Then we expect, for example, that Luca, the least common, the last common ancestor of all life, must have had genetics that are a superset of everything that lives today. But what we know from genetic studies is that if you follow the evolutionary model, and this person is an evolutionist, then we know that Luca probably had something like 350 or something genes.
Yeah.
And we have 25,000 of them. So it doesn't look at all that there is a reverse gradient of life. Life seems, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God has created life in a progressive way. And I think even Fuzz is adopting what can be called progressive creationism, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And I actually agree with this point of view that God has progressed life. He did intervene all the time. He had discontinuities like creating humans. And I would actually point you guys to look at my interview with Dr. Gunther Beckley, which was, complete, knockout. It was completely amazing. 3 hours of an avalanche of information. So you have to watch that. So this is my 2 cents on Robin Crompton. Yeah. Reem Auda says, finding truth, Sheikh Bassam Jarar would be great to interview someday. Thank you for all the work you put in. And thank you. Maybe, I'm not sure if Dr. Bassam would actually like doing a fully English interview, but why not? And Mansman says, Ahmed's analogy of the radio mutating to become an MP3 player is still hilarious to me. Yeah, that was a fun electronics analogy. So Munir says, do human rights matter in an evolutionary worldview? This is a big question.
Yeah.
I think they will claim it does, but at the end of the day, I don't think it does.
Because yeah, that question is really wow. It's a great question. It's an important question, and it's part of the reason why I struggle with the idea of theistic evolution or with evolutionary creation, because in an evolutionary framework, if you're dealing with strictly a materialistic framework, then you would argue that human beings are really just another example of an animal that is the product of an unguided process, that we have no inherent worth or value, that we're no different than any other creature. We're just part of this vast evolutionary tree of life, and that to say that humans have any value beyond any other organism is to commit an act of speciesism. You hear that, in the United States and in the academy, if you make the claim of human exceptionalism, you're considered to be incredibly arrogant. Wow. And so, ultimately, if we're just the product of evolution, there's really nothing other than social convention that dictates whether a human life is valuable or not. And you hear concepts that emerge like personhood, where a human being doesn't have rights, but a person does, where a person and a human being are not the same thing, where personhood is then defined arbitrarily as sentience or some kind of cognitive capacity, but that really is a very dangerous road to go down, because it means that then infants may not actually be persons, or people with disabilities may not be persons, or people as they get older and begin to lose cognitive abilities may no longer be considered persons. So it's all justifiable in an evolutionary worldview, and from a even if you are arguing that God is somehow using evolution to create, the question is that the evolutionary process continues. So at what point does then a human being actually have, the rights that we have that are ascribed by our Creator? And if we continue to evolve, are we evolving away from that life? So personhood becomes, again, arbitrary and ill-defined. So, so to me, when you have, a worldview that says human beings are indeed of infinite worth and value, in Christianity, and it would be because we bear God's image, we have infinite worth and value. And in Christianity, the view is that the way you treat another person is the way you would be is the comparable to treating God in that way, because if humans are image bearers, then what you do to another human is, in effect, the way you're treating God's image, right?
Yeah.
And so,
do you know that we have a hadith that it is forbidden to slap somebody on the face, and the rationale given in the hadith is that God has created Adam at his image. Yeah. So you don't slap somebody at the face.
Right.
So
yeah. So to me, it's hard to see how human rights really logically flow out of an evolutionary worldview, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also recommend the audience to look into the works of a person called Thomas Malthus, who was a very important scientist. I think he was just before Darwin, or maybe they were contemporaneous at some point of time. And he had huge influence on the Western civilization. And I think he was English. And some of his views was that, you shouldn't feed the poor.
yeah,
If they are not fit to the extent that they became poor, then it is, like the best for the human civilization that we get rid of them. And you shouldn't
yeah,
you shouldn't take care of the disabled, because they should be treated like the slow gazelle,
yeah,
because let the lion eat the slow gazelle, because
yeah,
then this is good even for the herd.
yeah,
And this is the real, this is what, when evolutionists or Darwinists were, even I think at that time, they were more honest to their worldview,
yeah.
which is not really very shared with their descendants. So they should go back to their common ancestors
Yeah.
and and
Well,
reconcile that. Yeah,
and the eugenics movement was driven by a Darwinian
absolutely.
view, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. Eugenics is like, for those who don't know what it is, it's like, finding the best genetics in humans, or the best traits, and then pushing that forward and
right.
getting rid of the rest or something. So it's definitely, so thank you for the question, Munir, definitely. And by the way, Elias was saying excellent commentary, doctor, and he's referring to you, obviously. And he says, predictions for creationists never count. Only the half-truth evolutionary predictions count. Man's man is amused with the order from chaos comment of mine. Says,
I
what
love
next?
man's avatar too, by the way.
Yeah. He
Well,
says, what?
that avatar, I have to totally off topic here. That avatar reminds me of a TV show that I used to watch when I was a little kid. It was called Our Gang, and it was produced in Hollywood in the like early 1900s and black and white, and but it was like this group of little kids that got into all kinds of mischief, and they had a club called the He-Man Woman Haters Club, right?
Wow.
And then one of the characters' nickname was Alpha Alpha, fell in love with a little girl named Darla, and so he broke ranks from the He-Man's Woman Haters Club, and they were all up in arms about what do we do to pull him back in. So anyway, sorry, I couldn't resist, but
Yeah.
I just always get a kick out of it. I love the avatar. It's awesome.
Yeah. And he also says, what next? We evolved to learn how to evolve. And laughing, I think he's referring to my commentary on the absurd commentary of those who wrote the mutations are not random, and then saying that evolution is actually a product of random evolution itself. Yeah. And Elias also says chimpanzees and humans are both descended from something more like living humans than living chimpanzees. How uncomfortable that may be to us. This is what he says. Yeah. So if he takes it like it's a downhill, then there was, the grays, and then, the whites, and then eventually you have humans, and then it's a downward path. So how miserable. And then he said,
Actually,
yeah, yeah,
in all seriousness, now that comment was made, um, there one of the problems that is confronting people that are looking for an evolutionary origin of humanity is, how do you explain the origin of bipedalism, the ability to walk erect? And the problem is that as far back as we go in the hominin fossil record, we see creatures with bipedal capabilities. There's not the traditional model is it was some kind of knuckle walking ape-like creature that gave rise to bipedal apes that then became hominins, right? That lineage, and that chimps are actually representing an ancestral state. And so I think there is an idea in light of this evidence where, how do you explain the sudden appearance of bipedalism, is that maybe actually the first ancestors were bipedal, and that chimps are actually representing a devolved state, right? So that, I think that may be the idea. But I'm going to thanks for that quote, because I'll look it up. But I think that may be the idea. But it's not an idea that I think is very mainstream, A, and B, it's born out of the fact that you've got some real problems trying to account for the origin of bipedalism. So it probably is easier to just assume bipedalism, and that again, chimps are in a devolved state.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me of something in the Quran about bipedalism, because it strikes me this. It says, "Ya ayyuhal insanu ma gharraka bi rabbika al-karim." O human, what has deceived you or made you arrogant towards your generous Lord? الذي خلقك فسواك فعدلك, who has created you, proportioned you, and set you upright. Okay, so it just says that being upright, which is the essence of being bipedal, standing straight, not leaning on your hands, is a direct intervention from God. You will not be able to find an evolutionary explanation for it. And it seems that if you have four limbs, it's more natural that you're using them to walk. The very thing that humans go through all this trouble to stand on two hands is really amazing. So yeah, and I think here Man's Man says, which would explain why Adam and Eve were allowed basically incest until the children's DNA richness became blonde. I think he's referring to my theory about Adam and Eve having a more rich genetic. I think yeah, you're really extending my idea here, and I would like to do some videos on it later. But yes, I think this explains many things. It explains how, for example, you have Sam and Ham and Japheth, which are the sons of Adam, who are in Genesis and in even in Hadith of the Prophet, obviously have different colors of skin. Were all coming from this couple who was obviously, and you have people like Doc and say, okay, was Adam like more like Asian or more like African? And how do we have those white people and dark people and yellow people and red people? So I think there is an explanation. Probably it will be very difficult because we don't have DNA of Adam, but who knows? Ilyas says, I mentioned his studies. He's talking about Crompton guy, to show that the entire idea of common descent is based on a highly interpretive set of data. How strong is a theory where the same evidence leads to two radically different conclusions? Quite insightful, actually. Man's Man is telling you thank you for commenting on his avatar. So, Fuz, I think that was a wonderful discussion that we had today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very engaging with the audience. My audience really love live discussions, and they have those great insights. So thank you very much for being here. I enjoyed every single second, set aside minute of this 1.5 hours. They passed like 10 minutes. Guys on the live chat and those who are gonna see this recorded, please do share this with your loved ones. Be it loved ones who are Muslims, Christians, Jews, people who are thinking to find faith and find God, people who are skeptical, people who already have very strong faith. Please do share it with teenagers who are, getting spoon-fed and force-fed down their throats this evolutionary nonsense, to support their faith and to show them that there are, scientists, engineers, doctors, who completely believe that this is completely absurd, and they're out there and they're willing to spend part of their precious time, like Fuz is doing today, to teach and to tell people the truth. So Man's Man is saying we really do. Thank you to the both of you. And Maurice says, thanks a lot for the answers. Waiting for some more streams. I have to tell you that what's coming in this series is completely, knock you out. It's unbelievable stuff. So do share this and do invite your relatives and loved ones to this. And as Ilyas is just saying now, thank you so much, Dr. Fuz and Ustad Ahmed. I will give the thanks more. Thank you, Fuz, also for this. topics are those topics are the utmost importance in society moving further away from God. Inshallah, it will not move further away from God. This is like الزبد الذي يذهب جفاء. This is like the foam on the top of the water that will eventually um, uh, bubble off, and things will settle, and only the truth will prevail. So peace be upon you all. Thank you for being here. First, this has been, super exciting to have you, and your great smile and deep knowledge and unbelievable composure. So thank you very much for being here. And everyone, once again, share this all over social media. I want to see it overflowing over Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, Quora, whatever. So just push it all over, please. And if you know about some people who are influencers who can actually recommend this, we're just starting. We chose to do today the intro, so we're just warming up, but we'll have the same routine. We will have the premiere and then the live stream. Next one is about something called DNA wires. So check out the thumbnail. It's already scheduled for next Thursday. And see you all in best health. Fuz, have a great weekend. And please.
Thanks for having me. It's I love spending time with you, and I'm so grateful to get to know your audience, and so we're going to have a lot of fun.
Yes, I'm sure. Inshallah, we'll do. So, everybody, having had so much fun together, thank you for being here. Peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'll be putting now the extra and wishing to see you all in the best of health soon enough again, inshallah, on this upcoming Thursday. And